It was a dark and stormy evening in the small town of Eastwood, a place that didn't see much excitement. The winds howled through the streets, and the clouds seemed to hang heavy in the sky. The weather was unpredictable, as it often was in the wild, open land of the West. It had been a long and tiring day for Maria, a young woman in her 20s, who had recently found herself living in this town far from home. Maria had moved to Eastwood to escape her past, a past full of hurt and regret. She had grown up in a big city, where she had always felt lost among the crowds. But even the city couldn't protect her from the choices she had made. And soon, she found herself running away to a quieter life in the country, hoping for a fresh start. Eastwood was small and quiet, and it seemed like the perfect place for someone like her to find peace. But peace was hard to come by, especially when the only job she could find was as a waitress in a local diner. The hours were long, and the pay was barely enough to cover rent and food. Most days, she worked double shifts, barely finding time to eat or sleep. She had tried to make the best of it, but there was something about the loneliness of the place that made it difficult to keep her spirits up. She often found herself walking home late at night, the streets empty except for the sound of her footsteps echoing off the old buildings. That evening was no different. After another exhausting shift at the diner, Maria stepped outside into the heavy rain, hoping to make it home before the storm got worse. She had only a short walk ahead of her, but the wind was fierce, and the rain felt like sharp needles hitting her skin. She pulled her thin jacket tightly around her shoulders and tried to hurry, but the storm was only growing stronger by the minute. As she walked down the quiet street, Maria's thoughts wandered back to the life she had left behind. She thought about her family, how she had broken away from them, how they probably didn't even know where she was anymore. They hadn't heard from her in months. And, to be honest, Maria wasn't sure if she ever wanted them to. She wasn't sure if she could face them again. The guilt and shame she carried made it feel easier to stay far away. The storm continued to rage, and soon, Maria found herself drenched from head to toe. Her jacket wasn't nearly enough to protect her from the pouring rain. She looked around, desperate for shelter. And that's when she saw it, a small, old barn, standing on the edge of town. It was a little off the beaten path, tucked away behind a row of trees. It was an odd place for a barn, and Maria had never noticed it before. But at that moment, she didn't care. She needed to get out of the rain. She ran toward the barn, her shoes squelching in the mud as she reached the entrance. The door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open with a creak. Inside, it was dark and smelled of hay and wood. The barn was empty, except for some old farming tools and a few crates stacked in the corner. Maria sighed with relief. She was out of the rain, at least for now. She sat down on a bale of hay, trying to catch her breath. Her clothes clung to her body, and her hair was plastered to her face. She wiped the rain from her eyes and pulled her jacket tighter around her. It wasn't warm inside the barn, but it was better than standing out in the storm. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the rain pounding against the roof. As she sat there, she tried not to think about how long it had been since she felt truly safe. It had been so long since anyone had cared enough to help her, and Maria was starting to wonder if she ever would feel that sense of comfort again. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside. Maria's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? It was far too late for anyone to be out here in the storm. She stood up quickly, her body tensing in fear. The footsteps grew louder, and Maria instinctively backed toward the wall of the barn, her mind racing with worry. Could it be someone looking to cause trouble? The door to the barn creaked open, and a tall figure stepped inside. The man was wearing a wide-brimmed cowboy hat that shielded his face, but his strong build and rugged appearance were enough to make Maria freeze in place. He paused when he saw her, his eyes narrowing slightly as if surprised to find someone else there. "Who are you?" Maria's voice trembled, but she did her best to sound confident. She wasn't sure who this man was, but she didn't want to show weakness. The man didn't seem to mind her question. Instead, he slowly stepped further into the barn, the rain still pouring outside. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes sticking to his skin. A horse's reins hung loosely from his hand, and a heavy coat draped over his shoulders. "I should be asking you that," he said with a gravelly voice. His tone wasn't unfriendly, but it was clear he wasn't used to strangers. "What are you doing out here in this storm?" Maria hesitated. She didn't know what to say. She had no reason to trust this man, but she wasn't sure what other choice she had. "I was just looking for shelter," she said quietly. "I didn't think anyone else would be out here. All. The man studied her for a moment, his dark eyes scanning her, as if trying to figure out who she was and why she was there. Maria shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, feeling like an intruder in her own moment of desperation. She had hoped to be alone, but now she wasn't sure what to do. "Well, it's a good thing you found this place," the man said finally. "A storm like this can be dangerous." Maria nodded, but she didn't feel like talking much more. She just wanted to sit and wait for the storm to pass. Alone. She couldn't explain why, but there was something about this man's presence that made her feel uneasy. It wasn't his size or his cowboy demeanor. She had met plenty of people like that before, but there was something in the way he carried himself. Something guarded. After a long silence, the man spoke again. "I'm John," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "I own this barn. You can stay as long as you need to." Maria didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't used to kindness from strangers, especially not from men like him. She had learned long ago not to trust people easily. But there was something in his tone, something that made her believe he wasn't dangerous. Maybe he was just a lonely cowboy looking to help. "Thank you," Maria said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. John didn't respond right away. He just nodded and stepped back, letting her have space. As the storm continued outside, Maria realized that for the first time in a long while, she felt a strange sense of relief. She was safe, at least for now. But little did she know that this chance encounter with John would change the course of her life in ways she could never have expected. The storm outside seemed to grow louder as the hours passed. The wind howled, and the rain beat relentlessly against the barn's roof. Maria, wrapped in the cowboy's heavy coat, sat huddled on the bale of hay. The warmth from the coat was comforting, but the coldness from the storm outside seemed to creep into her bones. She pulled the coat tighter around her, grateful for its warmth. It was the first time in a long while that she felt a sense of security. John stood a little farther away, leaning against the wooden wall of the barn. He didn't seem in any hurry to leave, and Maria didn't know how to break the silence between them. Her mind kept racing, thinking about how strange it was that a complete stranger would offer her shelter, let alone his own coat. It was an act of kindness that she hadn't expected, especially from someone like him. He was a cowboy, grizzled, rough around the edges, and with a presence that felt powerful even in the quiet of the barn. But there was something about him that felt different from what Maria had come to expect from people. There was no judgment in his eyes, no sense of superiority. Instead, there was only a quiet understanding that seemed to put her at ease. She glanced over at him, noticing the way his clothes clung to his frame. His boots were caked in mud, and his face was wet from the rain, though his wide-brimmed hat had kept most of it off. He was a man who had seen the world, and yet here he was, helping a stranger without hesitation. "So, you live out here all by yourself?" Maria asked, trying to break the silence. Her voice sounded quieter than she intended, as if she was unsure if he would even answer. John glanced at her, his expression unreadable. He stood up straight and nodded slowly, as if the question required careful thought. "I do," he said, his voice low and steady. "This is my land. Been living out here for years now." Maria nodded, unsure how to respond. She had always wondered what it was like to live alone in the wide-open spaces of the West, far from the noise and chaos of the city. But there was also a part of her that couldn't imagine being isolated like that. She had grown up around people. Too many people. Maybe. And the thought of being alone for so long felt like both a comfort and a curse. "Isn't it lonely out here?" she asked, almost before she could stop herself. John seemed to pause, as if he were choosing his words carefully. He looked out the barn door, his eyes scanning the empty land beyond. "Sometimes," he said, "but I've learned to appreciate the quiet. There's something peaceful about it." Maria didn't respond immediately. She was thinking about his words, trying to make sense of them. Peaceful. The idea of being at peace in complete solitude felt foreign to her. She had never known what it was like to be truly alone, without the noise and distractions of the world around her. "Where did you come from, Maria?" John's question cut through her thoughts. His voice was gentle, but there was a curiosity behind it. He wasn't prying, but it was clear he wanted to know more about the person sitting across from him. Maria hesitated. The truth was, she didn't really want to tell him about her past. It was something she preferred to keep buried, locked away where no one could see it. But something about John's quiet presence made her feel like she could trust him. Just a little. "I'm from the city," she said quietly. "I left a while ago. Just needed to get away." John nodded as if he understood. He didn't press her for more details, which Maria appreciated. There was something about his calm demeanor that made her feel like she didn't have to explain herself. Maybe that was why she found herself talking more than she had intended to. "I didn't exactly have the best life there," she added, her voice almost a whisper. "I had some bad experiences, some choices I wish I hadn't made. 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. John's gaze softened, but he didn't interrupt her. He just waited, letting her continue at her own pace. There was no judgment in his eyes, just a quiet understanding that made her feel like she could breathe. "It's hard, you know," she said, her voice catching slightly, "to feel like you're stuck. Like you're always running, but never really getting anywhere. That's how I felt." She sighed and shook her head. "I don't know if that makes sense." Me." John nodded slowly. "It does," he said simply. "I think we all feel like that sometimes." His words were simple, but they carried weight. Maria looked at him. Rhine, feeling a sense of connection that she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't because they shared the same experiences or understood each other completely. It was because he hadn't turned away. He hadn't dismissed her as just another lost soul. He had listened. Quietly, without offering any quick solutions or empty promises. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly, almost as if the words had slipped out before she could stop them. John raised an eyebrow. "Regret what?" "Leaving everything behind," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Starting over." For a long moment, John didn't answer. He stood there, staring out at the storm, as if he were thinking about his own life, his own choices. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady and calm. "Sometimes," he said, "but I don't dwell on it. You can't. Life's too short. The past is the past. You can only move forward." Maria thought about his words for a moment. She had spent so much of her life looking back, regretting her choices, wishing she had done things differently. But what if John was right? What if the only way to move forward was to stop looking back? The barn felt warmer now, not just from the coat she was wearing, but from the quiet understanding between them. The storm outside was still raging, but inside the barn, there was a strange sense of peace. John turned and began to move toward the door, but before he reached it, he paused and looked back at Maria. "I'm gonna make us some coffee," he said. "You look like you could use something warm." Maria smiled, feeling a flicker of gratitude. That would be nice. Thank you. John disappeared out of the barn, and Maria sat quietly, staring into the darkness of the storm. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe, like she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something different. The rain had lessened slightly, but the wind still howled outside the barn, rattling the wooden walls. The storm had been relentless, but Maria felt like the worst of it was over. She was no longer cold or drenched, and the warmth from the cowboy's coat seemed to seep into her body, giving her a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. John returned shortly, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee in his hands. He handed one to Maria, who took it gratefully, feeling the warmth of the cup as it settled into her hands. The aroma of the coffee filled the barn, a simple but comforting scent that made her feel grounded. She hadn't realized how badly she needed something warm, something familiar, until now. Thank you, she said softly, her voice still a little hesitant. She wasn't sure why she felt so exposed, sitting there with a stranger. But somehow, it didn't feel as awkward as she had expected. There was a quiet calm between them now, an unspoken understanding. John gave a slight nod and took a seat on a nearby bale of hay. He wasn't in a rush, wasn't pushing for her to talk or explain herself. There was something about his presence that made her feel like she could take her time. So, he said, his deep voice breaking the silence, what was it like back in the city? You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. Maria glanced up at him, surprised by his offer. He wasn't pushing for answers, just giving her the option to share or not. It was a rare thing, and it made her want to open up more. It's hard to explain. Maria began slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I guess it was always busy. No matter where you went, there were people everywhere. And I thought it would be enough. You know? The noise, the chaos, it made me feel like I was part of something. But then, one day, it all felt like a blur, like I was just another face in the crowd. She paused, the weight of her words settling around her. John didn't say anything, but his steady gaze encouraged her to continue. I made some bad choices, she continued, her voice quieter now. I trusted the wrong people, got involved in things that just weren't right for me. It felt like I was always trying to fix things, but the more I tried, the worse it got. Eventually, I had to leave. So, I came here. I thought it would be different. I thought I could escape everything. John nodded slowly, understanding that sometimes the biggest escape was from ourselves. Sometimes running away is the only option we feel like we have, he said softly. But you can't keep running forever, Maria. Maria looked down at her coffee, the steam curling up from the surface. His words hit her in a way she hadn't expected. She had spent so much time running from her past, from the choices she regretted. But had she ever truly faced them? Or was she just hiding? I don't know how to face it, she admitted, her voice full of uncertainty. I've tried, but it feels like the more I think about it, the more I get lost. I don't even know who I am anymore. John looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening. He seemed to be contemplating something, his gaze thoughtful. Then, without warning, he stood up, walking over to the barn door. The wind howled again, but he didn't seem bothered by it. He paused for a moment, looking out into the stormy night, before turning back to face her. You're not alone in this, he said quietly. We all have things we're running from. Things that scare us. But that doesn't mean we have to keep running. You can start over, but only if you let yourself. The past doesn't have to define who you are now. End quote. Thanks for watching. Maria didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to argue, to say that it was too late, that she couldn't change, that the things she had done were too big to just forget. But another part of her, the part that had felt the warmth of John's kindness, wondered if he was right. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe it was time to stop running. She was silent for a long while, her mind spinning with thoughts and questions she hadn't allowed herself to consider in a long time. The barn felt so still now, so quiet, that it almost felt like a sanctuary. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe deeply, without the weight of her past crushing her every step. John seemed to sense her need for space, and he turned away, heading back to the small table in the corner of the barn where he kept some of his supplies. He began to gather a few things, his movements slow and deliberate. Maria watched him, wondering what it was about him that made her feel both safe and unsettled at the same time. He had this quiet strength, this calm that she didn't quite understand, but it drew her in. He turned back to her after a moment, his face softening as he saw the look of uncertainty in her eyes. "You don't have to figure everything out tonight," he said gently. "It takes time. Just take it one step at a time. Start with tomorrow." Maria nodded, her heart heavy but hopeful. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a chance. It wasn't going to be easy, she knew that. But maybe it was possible. Maybe she didn't have to carry the weight of her past with her forever. As she sat there in the quiet barn, listening to the storm outside slowly dying down, she realized that she had come to a turning point. It wasn't a big moment or a grand gesture, but it was enough. She wasn't ready to make any big promises to herself just yet. But she was ready to try. She was ready to stop running. "Thanks, John," she said softly, her voice full of gratitude. "For everything." John simply nodded, his expression unreadable but kind. He didn't need to say anything more. The warmth of his gesture, the quiet strength in his presence, spoke louder than words ever could. Maria felt something inside her shift. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what the future might bring. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but maybe that was okay. Maybe it was enough to know that, for once, she didn't have to face it alone. As the storm finally began to ease, the barn grew even quieter. The rain no longer pounded the roof, and the wind had died down to a soft breeze. In the stillness, Maria allowed herself a small, hopeful breath. Tomorrow was a new day, and maybe, just maybe, it would be the start of something different. The storm had passed by the time Maria woke up the next morning. The sky had cleared, and a soft golden light filtered through the cracks in the barn. It felt like the world had been washed clean overnight. For a moment, Maria lay there, just listening to the quiet. The barn was still, and the only sound was the occasional creak of the old wooden beams. She felt the heavy coat still wrapped around her body, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill in the air. The storm had taken its toll. But somehow, being here with John, having someone so steady and calm, had given her a sense of peace that she hadn't known in a long time. For the first time in a long while, she had a quiet space to think, and the thoughts didn't feel so overwhelming. Maria stretched and slowly stood up. The barn was still dimly lit, but she could see better now. John was nowhere in sight. She wondered if he had already gone outside to check on the horses or perhaps just to tend to his usual work. She had no idea how ranch life worked, but she figured it was probably a lot of work, even when the weather wasn't so unpredictable. She grabbed her bag, her clothes still damp from the previous day, but at least she wasn't drenched anymore. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this clean or this free. The weight of the world that had felt so heavy on her shoulders just a day before now seemed lighter, almost like it was slipping away bit by bit. As Maria began to gather her things, the sound of footsteps outside caught her attention. She froze for a moment, unsure who it was. The barn door creaked open, and John stepped inside, carrying a bucket of feed for the horses. His hat was tilted slightly to the side, and his boots were caked in mud from the morning chores. He looked tired but content, as if the hard work of the day was simply part of the rhythm of his life. "Morning," he said, his voice low and warm. "I've got some breakfast cooking inside the house. Thought you might be hungry." Maria smiled, a little surprised at how much she had been looking forward to a simple meal. It wasn't the kind of meal she had imagined when she first arrived here. But it didn't matter. It felt right. "Thank you," she said softly, feeling a little embarrassed. "I didn't mean to take up so much of your time yesterday. I didn't expect, well, all of this." John shrugged, unfazed by her apology. "No need to thank me. You were stranded in a storm. Everyone needs help sometimes." The simplicity of his words caught Maria off guard. There was no judgment in his voice, no expectation. It was just a simple truth. It made her feel at ease, as if she wasn't being a burden, but rather just another person in need of a little kindness. She followed him outside, stepping into the crisp morning air. The barnyard was quiet, save for the soft neighing of the horses and the occasional clink of metal as John moved around, making sure the animals were well fed. It was peaceful here, a far cry from the noise and constant rush of the city. Maria had forgotten what it was like to be around animals, to live in a place where time seemed to move at its own pace, slower, almost like it didn't care about the clock. "Are you planning to stay in town long?" John asked, his voice casual, though there was a hint of curiosity behind it. Maria paused for a moment, taking in the peaceful sight of the land stretching out in front of her. She hadn't really thought about what came next. The idea of staying here, of continuing to hide from her past, didn't feel right anymore. But at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that this place, with all its quiet and simplicity, had given her something she hadn't had in years: space to breathe. "I'm not sure," she admitted after a pause. "I don't know where I'm going, but I know I can't keep running forever." John nodded thoughtfully as he finished feeding the horses. His hands moved in, practiced motions, each one filled with purpose. Running doesn't get you very far. You can run from the past, but it has a way of catching up with you. The key is to stop running and face it. Maria stood there, watching him work. There was something about his words that resonated deeply with her. He wasn't speaking in riddles, but rather in simple truths, the kind that hit you when you weren't expecting them. And for the first time in a long time, Maria felt the urge to stop hiding, to stop pretending that she had everything under control when, in fact, she didn't. "I think I need to face some things," she said softly, almost to herself. John glanced up at her, his expression kind but not overbearing. Facing things isn't always easy, but if you do it on your own terms, it's worth it. Maria thought about that for a moment. She had spent so much time avoiding confrontation, avoiding anything that made her feel vulnerable. But the thought of moving forward, of actually facing her past, didn't seem so scary anymore. In fact, it felt like the first step toward truly healing. "Maybe I'll stay a little longer," she said, more to herself than to John. "At least until I figure things out." John gave a small nod, as if he had expected nothing less. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. I've got plenty of work to do around the place. If you want to help out, it might give you something to focus on." "Ah." Maria smiled, a small weight lifting off her shoulders. "I'd like that," she said. Over the next few days, Maria found herself settling into a routine that was both unfamiliar and comforting. Every morning, John would go out to tend to the animals, and Maria would help him with whatever needed doing. It wasn't hard work, but it was honest work. The physical tasks kept her mind occupied, and for the first time in ages, she didn't feel like she was constantly thinking about her past or her failures. She was simply living in the present, doing what needed to be done. John was a quiet man, but his presence was reassuring. He didn't try to rush her or push her into anything. He simply let her be, allowing her to figure things out in her own time. He'd share bits of his own story every now and then, little pieces of his life that helped Maria understand why he had chosen this solitary life on the ranch. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when he had doubted his choices. But he had found peace in the quiet. Maria admired that, even if she wasn't sure she could ever be as calm as he was. But just being around him, seeing how he worked without complaint, how he gave so much without expecting anything in return, made her feel like she could take a breath and not feel so afraid of what was to come. One evening, as they sat outside on the porch of the small cabin where John lived, Maria looked out at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the fields. The quiet stillness of the evening felt like a promise. "I never thought I'd find peace like this," she said softly. "It's not what I expected, but maybe it's exactly what I needed." John sat next to her, looking out at the same view. "Sometimes the things we need aren't what we expect," he said. "They come when we're ready to stop running and just listen." Maria smiled, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't need to. For now, this was enough. The days that followed felt like a quiet dream. Maria woke up each morning to the sound of birds chirping and the soft rustle of wind in the trees. The ranch had become her new world, a world that felt strangely comforting and peaceful. She had always imagined that life would be loud and fast, filled with noise and people. But here, everything moved at a slower pace. And for the first time in years, Maria was learning to embrace it. John had taught her so much in such a short time. He didn't lecture her or tell her how to fix everything. He simply showed her by example. Each day, he worked hard without complaint, his hands rough from years of labor, but his heart kind and steady. He didn't seem to expect anything from her, other than to do her best and take each day as it came. And Maria had begun to understand that. She found herself enjoying the work. There was something rewarding about it. Something grounding. Feeding the horses, mucking out the stalls, and even just sitting with John at the end of the day, watching the sun dip behind the hills, became small moments of peace she had never known. One afternoon, after a long morning of work, Maria sat on the porch, gazing at the horizon. The ranch was beautiful rolling fields of green, dotted with wildflowers, and the occasional tree casting a long shadow across the land. She had come to love this view, and it felt like it was becoming hers, little by little. John was nearby, fixing a fence post that had been knocked loose by the storm. His movements were slow and steady, and Maria couldn't help but watch him for a while. He seemed completely at ease in this life, in a way that she hadn't yet found for herself. She wasn't sure if she would ever be completely at peace with the past she had left behind, but for now, she was learning to live with it. She was learning to let go of the constant tension that had followed her for so long. Maria had always been used to feeling like she was running. Always in motion. Always trying to outrun her mistakes. But here, at the ranch, she had begun to realize that running wasn't the solution. Sometimes, the best thing you could do was stand still and face what was in front of you. Whether it was the sun setting over the fields or the memories you wished you could forget. "John," she said one day as she was sitting on the porch, "do you ever think about the past? I mean, about things you wish you could change?" John paused for a moment, glancing up at her from where he was working. He wiped his hands on his pants and then slowly walked over to her. The look on his face was thoughtful, as if he had been expecting a question like this. "Of course," he said. "Everyone has things they wish they could change. Things they wish they hadn't done or said. But the truth is, you can't go back. All you can do is try to be better now. The past is a lesson, not something to carry around forever." Maria nodded slowly. His words resonated with her. She had spent so much time carrying the weight of her mistakes, the regrets that seemed to pile up like stones in her heart. But what John was saying made sense. If she kept looking back, she would never be able to move forward. "What if I don't know how to be better?" Maria asked quietly, her voice full of doubt. What if I don't know how to fix things? John smiled gently, sitting down beside her. You don't have to have all the answers right now. And you don't have to fix everything at once. Take it one step at a time. You're already doing better than you think. The fact that you're here, trying to make a change, is already a step in the right direction. Maria felt a lump in her throat, the weight of her emotions catching her off guard. She had come to this ranch feeling broken and lost, but in a way, John had helped her find her way back. He hadn't tried to fix her. He had simply shown her that healing could come with time, patience, and a little kindness. As the days passed, Maria's confidence began to grow. She no longer felt like the same person who had stumbled into the ranch weeks ago, cold, scared, and unsure. She was still a work in progress, but she felt lighter, more hopeful. She was starting to understand that it wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning from it. And then moving forward, one small step at a time. One evening, as the sun began to set and the air grew cooler, Maria joined John by the barn. He was leaning against a post, watching the horizon, and Maria couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude toward him. She had learned so much in such a short time. And although she knew her journey was far from over, she felt like she had started to find her place in the world again. John, she said, her voice more certain than before. I think I'm ready to go back to town. Maybe not forever, but I think I need to try. I need to see if I can face what's waiting for me there. John turned to look at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. He didn't say anything right away, but there was something in his eyes that told Maria he understood. I think that's a good idea, he said finally. You've come a long way, Maria, and I think you're stronger than you know. Whatever happens, you're ready for it. Maria smiled, feeling a surge of emotion. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she had the strength to face it. And that, she realized, was all she needed to move forward. That night, Maria packed her things. She wasn't sure when she would be back, but she knew that the ranch had given her something precious. A place to heal. A place to find herself again. She would never forget the lessons she had learned here, or the quiet kindness John had shown her. The next morning, as she stood at the edge of the ranch, looking out over the fields one last time, Maria felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't running anymore. She was walking forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. John was standing by the gate, watching her. He didn't say anything, but his quiet presence was enough. She smiled at him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for everything he had given her. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. John simply nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. Take care of yourself, Maria. I know you'll be just fine. With that, Maria turned and walked toward the road that led back to town. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't afraid to face it anymore. Whatever happened, she was ready to live her life with the strength and peace she had found on the ranch.